Well, good morning. My name is Cecile Shea, and I am in America's All-Year Playground, South Lake Tahoe, my hometown. And it's really a pleasure to welcome everyone today to this discussion of the travel industry. What is the current status of the travel industry, and what is the future of travel? Travel is important to our economy. It's certainly important to the economy of my hometown. And it's also important to being able for the future of business, for people to be able to meet together, to talk, to share meals, to do deals. And it's important for our own mental health and happiness and for bringing the world together. So this morning we want to talk really about three aspects of the travel industry. What does the history of systemic racism in America mean for particularly African Americans, but also other people of color who want to travel and want to feel comfortable traveling, but sometimes choose not to travel because they're not sure that they will feel comfortable. We want to talk about what COVID means for the travel industry, both currently, both let's say over the next 2 years, and also what does it mean for the future of the travel industry? And how can the travel industry both stay in business during this current crisis, but also prevent itself from being part of the problem? And how can it make sure that it is actually part of the solution as we try to deal with the current pandemic? And lastly, we want to talk about what is the future of travel in a world of global warming and of growing populations that increasingly have a huge impact on the world in which we live. And being in California, I'm very aware of that impact right now. So I do have to warn people that there is a small chance that I will lose either power or internet connectivity over the next hour because of the fires that are burning in this neighborhood. And if that happens, then our panelists will just continue until I can get back on. But with that said, I'd like to introduce our three very interesting panelists. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Evita Robinson is the founder of the Nomadness Travel Tribe, which is an online community of particularly people of color who are interested in travel and issues related to travel. She is the co-producer of the Nomadness Project YouTube channel, and she helps to, I guess you're the founder and you help to run the Audacity Fest each year, is that right? And maybe you'll say
Yeah, so the founder and creator of both Nomadness Travel Tribe and Audacity Fest.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Representing United, one of the sponsors of our yearly, hopefully once again yearly, once the current pandemic is over, Pritzker Forum on Global Cities. We are very happy to welcome Luke Bondar or Bondar, and thank you for being here. Luke is the Vice President of Marketing and Loyalty Programs and the President of the Mileage Plus program at United. And thank you for being here, Luke, and thank you again to United for its support of the Council and its programs.
Nice, great to be here today.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, the executive editor for travel at National Geographic is George Stone. George Stone has helped to steer the travel section at National Geographic towards sustainable coverage of sustainable tourism, cultural heritage, community engagement. He is the author of 2 books, both near and dear to my heart because of the career that I had in the Foreign Service. One is the history and lore of the, Mist and Stone, the history and lore of the Celts and Vikings. And second, Raging Forces, Life on a Violent Planet. You need to write a new chapter after this week.
Unfortunately,
Colorado.
Look, you're interested in the first, but living the second.
Exactly. So with that, Evita, I thought we would start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about what the history of systemic racism in the United States means for the travel of people of color today? You have a op-ed in Condé Nast right now that's really quite powerful, and you talk about how many people of color, particularly African Americans, just don't feel comfortable traveling. They don't know if they're going to face problems that other people don't face. And you also talk about the underrepresentation of people of color in the industry itself. So could you talk a little bit about your work, let's say 3 minutes of what you do and what you think the impact of systemic racism has been on the travel industry and what we need to do to fix it?
Yes, for those listening who don't know what Nomadness Travel Tribe is or Audacity Fest, I started No Madness as a community with 100 travelers of color that has now grown to over 25,000 around the world over the last 9 years. During that time, I'm also been a keynote and a very big figurehead in travel diversity and inclusion throughout the industry, spoken and keynoted at a lot of amazing, Destinations International is one of the biggest ones that I've been at. But even on a local level, we have some really tight relationships with destinations, boards of tourism, destination marketing associations, and things of that nature. George, hearing that you were with Nat Geo, I have to throw a nod to you because last year I was noted as one of your 21 most influential, most visionary women in travel history, which was one of the hugest press accolades of the many that I've gotten. So Nat Geo has a special place in my heart in that regard. Cecile, you brought up the op-ed that I have in Condé Nast right now. That is also a relationship I have being on one of their boards, their Women Who Travel board. And I think it's important to note that because when I speak about travel diversity and inclusion, it's not just about being a Black traveler. It also comes from the space of being a Black female traveler and entrepreneur in this space, and also a community organizer. My reach is much bigger than
Sure.
myself.
You talk in the editorial about how African Americans don't always feel comfortable traveling, and I've just spent the summer visiting a lot of national parks and public campgrounds across the country, and it's really disappointing how few people of color that I see taking advantage of our enormous natural heritage, for instance. And certainly overseas, while I saw a large number, to their credit, of African American service people taking advantage of being posted overseas, it's pretty clear they are underrepresented among international travelers.
I think part of that is the marketing issue, because what we notice in our communities of over 25,000 and the attendees that we have of our festival, our travel festival, Audacity Fest, what we see all the time is that we are represented in these areas. We're not Black travelers, not a monolith. We have the same interests as everybody else, and we take advantage of these. And so I think for us, it starts with the fact that we are not showcased in the marketing, we're not targeted in the marketing, but as a lot of stats and data have shown, we have a 53 to almost $60 billion annual expenditure in the travel industry, and that's on a domestic playing field. So I think for me, our scope of reference is different. Looking at something from the outside versus looking at something from the inside with this actual community gives it way more context, and understanding that we do have subsets in our community that are interested in this, and you're going to see more of it as COVID is, because now the thought process and the experiences are being geared more towards domestic travel and nature. I mean, we've seen an influx just within the last 2 months within our community.
So, but it sounds like what you're saying is that you feel like that sometimes the impact of your community is ignored by the industry, and perhaps there could be a little more outreach, say from the national parks, for instance, or from some of the state parks to your community?
I think everyone from the industry overall, national parks is one section of it, but I think it's something that's an industry-wide issue. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of myself, not just in the influencer space, but also in the community organizer and activist space. You're seeing different initiatives like Black Travel Alliance that are actually holding the industry overall to account with the lack of representation.
Okay, that's thank you. That's very interesting, and thank you for all of your work. It's really important, because I hate to think of whole groups of Americans not enjoying something that brings all of us so much joy and enrichment in our lives. So thank you for all of your work. Luke, obviously COVID has had a profound impact, and I should say that you're not actually on an airplane. Is that right? You're in Chicagoland somewhere with a really great background. But COVID has had a huge impact on travel, certainly. I came out here to see my mother, and I didn't feel comfortable flying, so I actually bought a motorhome along with a whole lot of other people of my generation, I have to say, and traveled across the country in a motorhome. What is the impact that you're seeing of COVID on the travel industry now and for the next, let's say, 2 years? It's going to take us a while to get 6 billion people vaccinated, even when we do have a vaccine.
Yeah.
Also, what does the industry need to do to help control the epidemic? Because I think that's the concern of a lot of people when they pull into tourist-oriented towns and they see supermarkets and hotels and other groups that are really not following some of the CDC's guidelines. And then those tourists are going to go home and spread COVID even further in their homes. And there's the whole issue of air travel. So what does the industry need from the government to help be a part of the solution? That's the second part of the question.
Yeah, okay. Let me take it in those two parts. I think the opening comment I would say is, without question, this is the most significant crisis that the travel industry has ever faced. And so, from the very beginning, it was clear that this was going to have a marked impact, and that has certainly been the case. As we've seen around the world, whether it's aviation, whether it's lodging, whether it's sort of all aspects of the travel sector, we've seen sort of significant hit to demand. We've seen a significant reduction in activity across the board. And through that time, we've been very focused on what can we do to ensure the safety of our travelers, of our employees, and as we look forward to restore confidence in travel, and in particular, obviously in our case, in air travel. Safety has always been a top priority for us. And so one of the early steps that we took was to work together with some third parties that would help us assess and define the right processes and protocols around the entire travel journey, from planning through day of travel, through on the plane, through post-trip, to identify the practices and processes that we could carry out that would really restore, as I said, confidence and help customers travel more safely. At the top of that list for most travelers is the notion of cleanliness, and understanding what measures are being taken and cleanliness and hygiene to protect them from the risk, obviously, of catching COVID-19. And so we launched a program called Clean Plus together with the Cleveland Clinic and with Clorox. And the focus of that program is to really raise health and safety, again, processes, protocols, really to the top of every aspect of the travel journey. And so throughout that, there are a number of steps that we've taken at United to really help drive those outcomes, drive those high levels of safety, high levels of cleanliness, high levels of hygiene. So we were one of the first US airlines to require customers to complete a health check assessment. Every time they fly, to check in on a flight, customers need to complete a checklist that identifies, if they've traveled anywhere outside of their home, if they've basically been exposed to anyone with COVID, if they've had a positive test result. We were the first airline to require all of our flight attendants and all of our passengers to wear masks. And I think the science is very clear when we look at what steps we can all be taking, and this goes a little bit to your second question, what steps we can all be taking to help slow the spread, contain the spread. Wearing a mask is, I think more and more we are seeing one of the single most important steps that we can all be taking. And if we look at markets around the world that did a great job early on in arresting the spread, it was some of the markets that have been more comfortable with the adoption of wearing masks in all facets of day-to-day life, not just travel related, but in everything they do. And in that process, they were quite successful.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I think your chairman has said he needs a federal regulation, that it's just not fair to expect the flight attendants to argue with people on a flight and force them to wear a mask, that there needs to be some kind of national policy.
I think we would agree and support with the comments of our chief executive and our chairman that these are steps and measures that we believe should be taken on a national basis. Yeah. But certainly in the airline industry, United has really sought to be at the forefront of steps to do everything that we can to really contain, slow, and control the spread of COVID. And in doing so, again, masks as sort of right up the top of that list. I mentioned obviously on board the plane, we also have mandatory mask wearing in our airports, in all the areas that we control and have operations over, both for customers and for employees. And we're one of the very first airlines to put
pulls their mask. I mean, you keep seeing pictures on Twitter every day, right? Customers sitting on United aircraft with their masks down below their chin.
And if that's the case, then those customers are warned once and they're handed a card that says, here is why you have to wear a mask properly. And if you don't, then you're banned from flying until such time as a vaccine is widely available. And as you would imagine, there are a number of customers that have been banned from flying.
Okay, well, that's really good to hear. I mean, one of the things that I saw as I was driving across the country is, some of these small counties that get a lot of tourists passing through,
Mhm.
they're trying to make up rules that both protect their own economies and, merchants don't have access to the same public health knowledge that certainly a big company like United does. And it just seems like some national guidelines would be very helpful in in helping the industry overall know what its people should be doing. I mean, someone who owns a bicycle rental shop in Moab, Utah is not going to have the same resources as United Airlines or Hyatt Hotels, right? So
Certainly,
I
certainly.
wonder how much support we're giving those businesses.
Yeah, look, I think if we look at markets around the world that have done the best job at controlling the spread, in most of those cases, there's been a strong role coming from government to help enforce and set mandates around safe practices and safe processes. And absent that, we've been doing everything we can, whether it's our hygiene practices on the plane, whether it's cleaning planes in every turn, but most importantly, again, coming back to this question, whether it's getting everyone to wear a mask, which we think is, and the site shows very clearly, is one of the most important things we can all be doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Luke. George, welcome. Some of my favorite places to visit, Venice, Italy comes immediately to mind, and Big Basin Redwood Forest, where the visitor center no longer exists. The world is changing pretty quickly, and a lot of that is human action. What do you think the industry needs to do to be sure that our children and grandchildren are going to be able to have the same rich tourism opportunities that so many of us have had in our lives?
Well, one of the important things that we need to do is already starting to happen. Because of this pandemic, people are talking more. So there are more self-identified stakeholders in these large conversations. Prior to this, when we were trying to encourage our readers to think about sustainable travel, it was a vague, amorphous idea. People hated the word. It didn't excite people to click on the articles. There wasn't a drive toward it. In Europe, we saw a little bit more uptick in engagement. I think because conversations had evolved a bit beyond. But right now, what we're seeing is urgent conversations and really strong voices forcing their way into the conversations. And so Evita is one of them. And the article that she mentioned that I really, we were proud to include in Evita and was 21 visionary female travelers who are changing the way we see the world. But the reason to do an article like that is because those voices weren't always easy to hear. So now I think there are more people listening, and there's certainly more people talking. So the conversations have gotten bigger. And where that actually functions, in some spaces, like what you're talking about, national parks, you get a town like Jackson, Wyoming, that we've visited and covered a couple times now during the pandemic. Our first article was, will a lack of tourism damage Jackson? All the business owners, yeah, right.
Having just been in that part of the world, that does not happen.
Totally. So we were wrong. So we went back to visit, and we said, now what are they going to do with too many people? And then what's happening there? And and how are our store owners contending with without a sort of a national code? How are they having these conversations to try to deal with patrons who won't wear masks? And how is that affecting the health of the community? How then is that affecting the health of isolated segments of communities? So we've covered COVID in travel lands, which can function very differently. COVID in communities that are underserved. So while this is happening, then there's this huge national conversation on diversity, inclusion, equity, race, ethnicity. So there are more important conversations happening right now in travel and tourism than I've ever heard before. And it is so different from before this, when we're saying, oh, sustainable tourism, watch it, take care of your plastics, these cool things are happening. Now people know it matters and they're paying
What
attention.
is sustainable tourism? I mean, in the end, when you've flown all the way to wherever, right, and you're staying in a hotel, can that be sustainable? I mean, what is your definition of
Complicated answer. I mean, if you want to, if the answer is going to include carbon offsets, then you're in a complicated conversation. So if the answer is that doesn't mean it's not legitimate. And major airlines, cruise lines, major companies, including Disney, which owns National Geographic, a massive carbon offset plan for the cruise ships. But on an individual level, what actions can you take? As travel media for consumers, I like to take one step back and say, okay, let's not have those conversations. Let's talk about the communities, equity within communities, stakeholders, going to trying to keep the money you spend within the community, trying to stay longer, stretch out your visit, drive. There's another thing. Right now I'm trying to think of silver linings of the pandemic, and I see a lot of them. People driving around the US, keeping the money locally for the most part, being involved in conversations, seeing things that they didn't see before. I've been spending a lot of time in North Carolina during this, seeing Confederate flags flying around. Well, the conversation is very different around that now. And this is actually not bad to have visibility, conversations, and see where that takes us.
I agree, and meeting with Americans from all around the country is something that we don't get enough of in our countries, particularly these days. And so, anything that adds to that is great. I am reminded by our wonderful producers that I neglected at the outset to point out that the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan organization, and that the views expressed today are those of the speakers and not of the council. And we want to give a special thanks to our members and our donors who are making this series of online conversations possible. And we thank you for your continuing support. We look forward to the day when we can get back together again at Prudential Tower and meet together and have a glass of wine and talk about these issues. But until then, thank goodness for the online community. So with that, we're going to go to, by the way, those of you who are watching from home, please log on to ccga.live and ask questions, ccga.live. And you see me looking down occasionally, sorry about that, but I'm looking at my iPad to see what questions have been submitted. So please do go online, and you can also vote up questions so we can see ones that are of particular interest to the viewers, the viewing community. With that, Luke, I'm wondering if you have a response to Evita's comments that too much of the industry ignores certain segments in their advertising and in their outreach. I realize you particularly work in airlines, which is kind of a different bailiwick than certainly hotels or casinos or national parks or whatever. But is there a consciousness industry-wide as you speak to your counterparts from other segments of the industry that they need to do more, both to hire people of color into executive positions, but also be aware of the power of that community to the travel industry?
I mean, 100%. I think United's purpose is connecting people and uniting the world. And the role that we play bridging communities, both within the United States and around the world, is not lost on us. As one of the world's largest airlines, we have a critical responsibility in that respect. At United, it's always been, I guess, part of the conversation, but I think it's fair and right to say that this year has brought a spotlight to the inequity, to the privilege and the impact of privilege, and to the disparity that we see across this country in particular. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm Australian by background. I've lived in the US 14 years. But I feel like, having lived here 14 years, I certainly feel I can comment as a resident of the US. But I've also lived in a bunch of countries around the world and seen sort of the shift and the evolution that's taking place. At United, I think we are leading the industry in many respects. We appointed Brett Hart as our president in May of this year. He's the first Black president at United. He's the most senior ranking Black executive, as far as I'm aware, in the aviation industry globally. Brett's a phenomenal leader, and Brett brings a passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion to our business that I think is second to none. We recently appointed Jessica Kimbrough as our Chief Diversity Officer. She's phenomenal, and there is a focus on addressing what we would recognize within our own business is a shortfall. We're not doing enough, and we can do a lot more within the business. And then when we look out at how we market our business, back to some of Evita's comments, I think you're spot on. I think as an industry, we have historically focused on the business community. We focused on leisure travel. We've certainly recognized and represented all of our communities in our marketing, but perhaps not as distinctly and as focused a way that recognizes some of the differences that we need to take into account, that we're all travelers, we all have common interests, but how we, where we find those travelers and how we speak to them and through what channels and what media and what markets, we may need to come at that differently. So I think there's a huge opportunity in front of us at United. I'm proud of a lot of the work that we're doing in this space.
Thank you. Evita, I have a dear friend who, has a wonderful bio, has done everything he's supposed to do. He came out of Robert Taylor Homes, got a graduate degree, became a leader in his professional field, went on to become an executive in a Fortune 500 company, and he's never traveled. He's never been to Europe. And I asked his wife, who happens to be white, I said, I don't understand, why won't he go to Europe? I keep encouraging him to travel a little bit. This was before COVID, obviously. And she said he's too scared. He's afraid that he will be persecuted or harassed because of his race. It's very hard for me to get him to travel. And what is your message to people? First of all, is that a generational thing? I mean, is that something that particularly people who are in their 60s or 50s might worry about? And do you have a message both to those of us who should make it clear to people that they are very welcome? I think you were very eloquent about that. But how do you encourage people who might worry about going to Europe or about, traveling in North Carolina, that it's okay to travel or that they should?
Right. I want to respond to Luke a little bit first. I want to say thank you for the acknowledgement that you just put forward. I'm also well aware of some of the internal hirings that you all have done in that area, but also bridging diversity with sustainability. You all did a campaign with Hey Ashley Renee, who is a Black and Indian influencer, who's also a good friend of mine, a member of Nomadness, and a multi-time speaker at our travel festival, Audacity Fest. And the work I saw you do with Ashley Renee around sustainability was awesome. So I just wanted to give you a public nod in regards to that as well. Back to your question, Cecile. I come from a space of, I'm a 3-time expat. I've lived in Thailand, Japan, France. My community is built of avid travelers, right? One of the prerequisites to get into Nomadness Travel Tribe is you have to have at least one passport stamp to get in. So I work within the realm of actual travelers who do this. It's not a second thought. They understand the importance of travel in their life, both on a business and a personal level, the development that you get as a person to go out. So I have to be completely candid in that my expertise runs within the community of people who do this. Right. Now, people who don't and who are scared, I would say particularly to Black travelers, what we're finding right now, and I talk directly to this in the Condé Nast feature, is that right now it is more dangerous being in the United States as a Black person than it is to be in a lot of these other countries abroad. To be a Black traveler is to, find your itinerary points, your vendors that you want to use before you go abroad, but also to research how Black people are received in this area. And unfortunately, a lot of times my community and myself have felt safer outside of the United States than we have inside of the United States as an actual resident and citizen of this country. And this is kind of where we are. And historically, when you talk about generations, in my TED Talk, I talk about the Negro Motorist Green Book and what it was like for Black people to travel the United States during Jim Crow. One of the biggest compliments I've ever gotten about Nomadness is that we're kind of like the new age digital Green Book on an international scale. So what you're seeing is historically, all the way up until present day, there has been a safety and a how are we received and a is this place racist communication that our demographic just has to have regardless of where we go. The difference is my community in particular hasn't let it stop them. And once we go out, we know that the truth is we're actually a lot of times better received as Black travelers than we are in the United States.
And that last statement makes me very sad. Although I'm having spent most of my adult life overseas, I'm not surprised to hear that, because I think that African Americans, with the exception of a few countries, find traveling overseas to be quite freeing, actually. So thank you for saying that. I'm going to turn to some of the questions now, and one in particular, I'll open to all of you, but I think George, will start with you. Even if we have a 50% effective vaccine, and we still don't know how long people's immunity is going to last after they've been sick from COVID, COVID's going to be with us perhaps forever. Small epidemics, it's going to be a particular concern to older travelers. Do you see the industry changing permanently in certain ways in responding? And even if it's not with us forever, but it's going to take a while to get 6 billion people vaccinated, right? So at the very least, we're living with some version of the status quo for a couple of years in all likelihood. So how do you see the industry adapting and changing to COVID in the medium and the long term?
There's sort of a aspirational and actual path to respond to that. And based on some of the feedback we get from our readers, when we push out articles out that are like, where can you go now? They do so well. It's crazy. I mean, this is even in the last month or two when Americans couldn't go anywhere. And I said, well, I don't even know if this is the right article. What message are we putting out there? People want to know where they could go. That speaks to their aspirations to get back on, on the road and going places. What are they going to run into? What complications? I thought Massachusetts had a really terrific plan. A travel registry that was dependent on a COVID test, a COVID negative test, which they just instituted maybe a month and a half ago or something like that. And some other regions and states have done things like that, but that's not really scalable into the future. Right. I think there are going to be some huge changes, but people, and there's going to be some unwise choices. So people are wanting to get up and out. We can see that already in America. We can see some bad choices, overcrowding in beaches and things like that. So it speaks again to the need to have guidance. I do think from the top, national guidance about what standards are and what we should be thinking. But I do think people are going to creep out and start to discover the world. Some might be lured by good deals. Some might be, I think, reasonably compelled by actual science. We hope as National Geographic they are things like the HEPA filters in airplanes and the reality that air in airplanes is actually safe to breathe, probably more so than the air you breathe getting to the airport. So there's real science that is going to work to get travelers back going. There are real aspirations and compulsions that are going to work to get travelers back out there. So how long is it going to take? I don't have that crystal ball, but I do think that people are going to get up and out, driving around North America, driving around the United States. There are going to be these pockets of travel globally, and I don't think it's actually going to take as long. There will be spikes. There will be problems, and even with a vaccine. But I'm a little optimistic about it more so. That said, I think headed into the normal flu season this fall, I think we're looking for a bad 6 months.
So Luke, there are quite a few questions on here about your company's financial future, which you may or may not want to answer. I can understand completely why you might not want to, but if you'd prefer to just go up a little further, in the short term and in the long term, what are United's plans? I mean, you've got to make it through the next 6 months or a year, obviously.
Yep.
Also thinking about, technological or equipment changes for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can I'll break my response into a few pieces. Firstly, on the financial front, we took actions early on to essentially shore up the strength of our liquidity position to give us the longest runway possible, because we recognize that until such time as there's a vaccine or a cure or a treatment and it's widespread, and ultimately to 6 billion people around the world. But even if we look closer in at sort of say our domestic market, that until that is in place, that we will see pressure, we'll see downward pressure on demand. But as George was saying, I think the counter to that is there is absolutely a growing sort of pent up desire to get out and travel. And so the impact of HEPA filters on our planes in particular, I think will increasingly, we will see the science show the safety that comes in that environment. That in fact, it may actually be one of the safer public environments that you could be in. And so, this return to confidence that we need to work through with our customers is mission critical for us. And so we have certainly made significant adjustments to our schedule. The amount of flying that we were doing in the second quarter was at historic all-time lows. The load factors we're seeing on our planes was very low. Some of our peers in the industry were perhaps more bullish on how quickly it was going to come back. United's been probably the most bearish right from the beginning to say this thing's going to hit hard. It's going to last for a long time. We need to prepare for that length of time, and we need to make adjustments. So we've certainly looked at tough decisions within our own company around sort of adjustments that we've had to make to variabilize our costs and reduce our underlying cost structure. But when we look more importantly at the sort of path ahead and where we can make investments, we're focused on what do we do to continue to expand the efficacy of safe travel practices. So significant investment in touchless travel, allowing customers to go through that travel journey, minimizing the amount of exposure to sort of risk of transmission that they might otherwise have. But I think so I think what we'll see over time is a focus on travel itself, on air travel, on staying in a hotel, on some of these areas actually being quite safe practices. What the challenge, I think, is more so around the social practices at destinations, and how can we, as a larger society, get after putting those practices in place that are either coming from central mandate or that as a society, we are all acknowledging our civic duty to each other to take care of one another. And I think that there is some of that needs to sort of continue to rise up in importance because this thing is going to be around for another year plus at least. And so unless we all take on some of that responsibility, we'll continue to see some of these super spreader events that occur from time to time in college towns and beach destinations and others. And so, the more we can get after that, the better. I do think that the science is going to be very helpful. Outdoors tends to be a significantly lower transmission risk than indoors. And so it's sort of some of the indoor activities that are of the greatest concern. So travel itself, not so bad. We need to help build confidence, but all coming together as a society around what we can do. And again, I'll come back to my comment earlier. I think if everyone were wearing masks, we'd be in much better shape.
Thank you. Thanks. Evita, what do your members and readers want and need to feel comfortable traveling again? And I think a lot of your readers tend to be younger. Are you hearing anything from, the over 50, over 60 set who traditionally spend a lot of money traveling around the world?
Yeah, we are definitely millennial saturated as far as age demographic goes. But we have members that are definitely, and who have been on our trips, that are definitely older and younger. So we're kind of across the board with the saturation of millennial. With that being said, I think there's this duality to it. There is the safety of actually going on a trip, knowing that there's social distance, knowing that there's masks, knowing that the things that they want to see are open to some capacity to be able to make the trip worth it. And then on the other end, there's the financial safety, which is, okay, if this ends up getting canceled, what are your refund policies looking like? How easy is it for us to be able to get our money back? Is it a refund or is it a credit? Things of that nature. So you're seeing this duality between like the safety of self and also the safety of their finances. That's something that, is a big talking point in our community right now. And even how we're going forward, planning our No Madness trips. We postponed 2 this year already. to Bermuda and Cartagena to next year. And we already had 4 other trips split up between, Africa, Canada, all over the place that we had on the books that are now we're kind of just like looking at it. But I love the approach of let's take our time for a second. And I do think so many people were aggressive thinking that this was not going to be around as long as it is, or have the effect, or that we would just have better mandates from the top down with federal mandates. So with that being said, we're all maneuvering, but I would say it's a mix of safety of self and safety of finances in case something does get canceled or postponed.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So we're down to the last 6 or 7 minutes. So I thought I'd give each of you 60 to 90 seconds to make some final comments on, what do you want to say to the travelers and the people who miss traveling, who are tuned in right now? Where do you think this is going over the next couple of years or even 10 or 15 years? So we'll just kind of go in the same order. Luke, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Well, firstly, thanks for having us on today. Really appreciate it. Great to get a chance to speak with everyone. Throughout this pandemic, United has continued to serve a bunch of markets around the world and obviously across the US. And so, I would say to travelers, know that travel opportunities are there. And increasingly, if you look to the science in support, air travel is a safe practice. I've flown with my family of 4 kids, because we had that pent up demand to get out. And, I think in many respects, never felt safer. Clean planes, sort of a civility to the travel journey with all travelers looking out for one another. That was quite impressive. And so the opportunity to travel is there. Obviously, we all have to work through this pandemic together. But I would encourage everyone to sort of take on their civic role and do their best to help eliminate the spread by wearing a mask. But know that the airline industry, and United especially, are taking steps to ensure that the air travel and that right across that travel journey, that the opportunity for safe, hygienic, clean travel is there. And then I would encourage everyone to travel safely at the destination as well.
Thank you very much, Luke. Evita, what are your last comments for the people tuned in?
I would say to understand that there's a community that is still serving you out there. I always come from the community standpoint just because of what I do and where I am. I think for this time, it's been important for us to be able to still give relevant content, to still survey our community and listen to what their needs and their wants are, and to take that data in on the back end and be able to process it through what we put out. Us turning this weekend was supposed to be our Audacity Travel Festival in New York City. And, we made a hard pivot back in May to do it digitally, and it ended up being amazing, attracting people from 24 countries. And so it ended up being something that is now a part of the brand. And we did our second iteration August 1st and have another one on October 24th. So I think understanding that, don't be scared of the moment. Understand that there is creativity and there is innovation that lies within this moment. And for the actual traveler, understand that there are still ways that you can get value added to your experience in the digital world and in the more localized world. And it's really just about seeking it out and finding the best community that's executing in a way that really speaks to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very encouraging. George.
Well, National Geographic is travel is sort of in the information and inspiration business. And so I'm really happy to follow Luke and Evita, because Luke is representing in some ways how we get places and opening the world, and Evita is representing the communities of passionate travelers. So I'm looking for silver linings every week, and I'm finding a lot of them. So this idea that we can talk about travel, we can dream about travel, we can prepare to get back into the world, isn't just like a platitude. I was having dinner with friends last week, and the conversation was, where, if you could go anywhere, where would you go right now? And that was like a 2-hour conversation right there. It was, and what was interesting was, some people wanted to go to new places. Some people wanted to revisit a place that where they left a piece of themselves, and where that means something. Some people have returned to places again and again around the world. So this idea of identity is connected with our place in the world. Travel is sort of how we explore our identity and get to know the world. I just know that we are going to get up and out and we're going to start seeing the world. So what drives us is whether it's an article that's about like the fountains of Versailles, like last week, or if it's an article about Black travelers in national parks and safety and security, very practical, tactical, and issues driven, or aspirational on the other hand. We're just excited to sort of be part of that conversation because the travelers are there. They haven't gone anywhere. They're just not moving so much right now.
That's great. It answers one of the questions that we had from the audience, which is what is the future of virtual travel? So, and on that note, since we have 1 minute left, I'm going to ask you all for the one place that you look forward to going to once the borders are all open and you can go anywhere that you want and you're going to feel safe going there. So what's one place you would like to go or would like to take your family either again or for the first time? I'll start. I've always wanted to visit Botswana and do a photo safari. So I'm going to get down there one day and I'm really looking forward to being able to do that. Luke, what about you?
My family would kill me if I didn't say Australia because that's where I'm married to an Australian, but all our kids are born here. So Australia's got to be near the top of that list. But we've been flying to Tahiti for a couple of years now, and I'm yet to get there. So that's right up near the top of my personal list as well.
Sounds beautiful. Yeah, that's great. Evita, how about you? Once the borders are open, where do you want to go?
Morocco. I was supposed to be shooting in Morocco and Egypt almost the whole month of April and got grounded. So yeah, definitely Morocco.
Egypt is just astounding, and I hear that Morocco is wonderful. So good. I hope you get there really soon. How about you, George?
All the above, but we used to live in Singapore, so we could hop these short little flights. And just going into Indonesia, whether it would be Bali or whether it's Jakarta, and just eating these wonderful foods that are so flavorful, going to the markets, buying these cool textiles, just wandering around and getting lost would be my dream.
That's wonderful. Well, Luke Bondar from United Airlines, Evita Robinson, founder of Nomadness Tribe, and George Stone from National Geographic Travel. Thank you very much for being with us today. And thank you for continuing to support the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. See you again soon. Bye-bye.